Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. I'm Chris DeLuca, one of the Associate Deans here in the School of Grad Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. We're thrilled to have you part of this session. Today, we'll be talking about funding your graduate degree here at Queen's University, whether you're a master's student or a PhD student or a diploma student coming to join us at Queen's or thinking about joining us at Queen's. We'll talk about all the different funding options for you. And so I'll begin by going through a presentation and then we will open it up for your questions as well. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, which are the lands where Queen's University sits, and we are grateful to be able to play, learn, and collaborate on these lands. Is when you join the Queen's community as a graduate student, you are really joining an inclusive and collaborative community, one where we support each other's learning and research, and where we prioritize your well-being for your academic and professional success. And so I wanted to start here because you'll notice that at Queen's, we emphasize and start with your well-being. And that means being well in many ways and many spaces, including financially well. And that's what we'll talk about today, is the ways that we support you financially so that you feel secure to be academically and professionally successful. When you join Queen's, you're also joining a vibrant academic community that includes over 6,000 graduate students from Canada and around the world. So you are supported both locally and globally in your learning. And so there are opportunities to connect here on campus in Kingston, but of course with colleagues around the world. And that's through our 22 research centers and institutes, with our research chairs, our Canada research chairs and other research chairs, and with our emphasis on sustainability and impact through our research and through our teaching. Queen's is recognized as one of Canada's leading institutions in sustainable research and teaching. And so let's dive into funding. Funding is essential when you're thinking about graduate studies, thinking about how will you pursue this work in a way that you are financially secure and that you can continue and sustain the graduate degree from beginning to completion. And so your first point of contact when you're thinking about funding will be our funding webpage, which is located on the School of Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs webpage. When you click on Graduate Studies, there's a drop-down menu and you can click on funding from there. And that funding page, which was called Funding Packages, will outline all of our funding options and opportunities for you, as well as our guidelines and requirements for funding at Queen's. So again, this is your landing page for funding. I'll encourage you to go to that if you are coming to Queen's or you are currently studying at Queen's and have questions about funding. This is your first point of contact, our SGSPA funding page. So some of the foundations of funding at Queen's: our base minimum funding package for all doctoral full-time students is $23,000. That means all full-time PhD students across campus receive a minimum of $23,000. However, our average funding package for doctoral students is $33,600 Canadian funding. When we look at the master's level of study, the majority of full-time thesis-based master's students are funded, and they receive an average funding package of $24,500. So a distinction there is recognizing that our master's students pursue various kinds of master's degree, and the ones that are here pursuing a full-time thesis-based master's typically receive funding in an average range of $24,500. Those that might be pursuing a more professionally based master's, course-based master's, or online master's may not be receiving funding. If you have questions as to whether or not your master's degree is a funding eligible one, the best point of contact is your program for that. So reaching out to the specific program and your graduate program assistant. So how is your funding package comprised at Queen's? What goes into your funding package, those minimum funding guarantees, or your overall funding that you will receive on a yearly basis? There are three overall ways that we fund our graduate students. The first is internal awards, the second is external awards, and the third is employment opportunities. So when we think about internal awards, this includes any Queen's-based fellowships and awards, which includes graduate research fellowships. So Queen's-based awards might be our Queen's Graduate Award, a McLaughlin Fellowship, anything that we assess at Queen's for you to give you funding. These are internally competitive awards or awards that we assign as part of your funding package. They can also include graduate research fellowships. Graduate research fellowships are opportunities that your supervisor will give you and funding that your supervisor will give you for you to carry out your thesis or dissertation research. So oftentimes internal awards will make up a large proportion of your annual funding package. And these are awards that you don't necessarily need to do any work for. They are just funds that go towards you to support your studies. The second category is external awards. External awards are competitive awards. They might operate at provincial levels or at our national level, including our tri-agency awards, NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR. Those are our three major national level funding bodies that we would encourage all of our graduate students to apply for if you are eligible. And they allow you to gain additional funding, which will go towards your funding package and oftentimes help support your studies along the way. And so your external awards, we provide you with some support so that you become very competitive in receiving those external awards. And we can get into more details on what those look like. And then the third category is employment opportunities. And employment opportunities can look like teaching assistantships, research assistantships, or teaching fellowships. So a teaching assistantships is where you are supporting a lead faculty member or instructor in a course and doing things like grading, maybe running tutorials, and getting paid for that work. A research assistantship is where you're supporting a faculty member in doing their research. So this might be something like doing data collection, preparing a research ethics, preparing a publication, a paper for publication, where you're getting paid to do that research work with that faculty member. And a teaching fellowship at Queen's is where you are the responsible instructor for a course, where your job is to design and deliver the content of that course for students at Queen's. All of these three employment opportunities are at Queen's, are bound by a collective agreement and by a union, and are regulated by a pay structure. So all three of these funding opportunities will be leveraged to comprise your funding package, which you will be given on a yearly basis if you are in a funding eligible program. So a few key questions you might be wondering about when it comes to funding at Queen's. The first is tuition covered as part of your funding package? And so at Queen's, tuition is not part of your funding package. You receive your annual funding package, and out of that, you are responsible for paying tuition, as well as paying for your living expenses. That includes your food, your housing, any health insurance or other insurances, any other expenses you need to live and sustain yourself as part of your degree. A second key question that you might be thinking about is, when is Queen's funding distributed? So when will you receive the funding that's affiliated with those internal awards or external awards or with any of those employment opportunities? So you will receive a letter that indicates your funding package in August of each year in preparation for that following academic year that outlines your base annual funding commitment. And in that, it will indicate where your funding is coming from, whether it's awards-based funding or employment-based funding. Depending on the kind of funding you are receiving, you will either receive funding on a term basis. So if it's an awards-based funding, typically that's distributed at the beginning of each term. So you'll receive money at the beginning of September, January, and May. And if it's employment-based income, you're typically receiving money on a monthly basis for the duration of that employment contract. So if your RA-ship, your research assistantships, runs for the duration of the fall term, you'll receive funding each month of that fall term. All funding is deposited into a Canadian bank account using a direct deposit method. And so you'll be asked for that information when you become a Queen's student. And then the third key question is, how do external awards impact your funding package? So if you receive one of our national level awards, how might that impact your annual funding package? So Queen's students are highly competitive for these awards, and we do provide a lot of support to make you competitive for these awards, including workshops, samples, and other supports to make sure that you are ready for these opportunities and that you can put in some competitive applications for them. If you do receive an external award, typically that award goes towards your base funding, so it will be included as part of your minimum funding package, but then any employment opportunities and other funding will be added to that funding package. And oftentimes students who receive external awards have higher overall funding packages. In part at the PhD level, our national awards, external awards, by the tri-agencies are $40,000 a year. So you can see that that's already higher than our base minimum funding package. And then the last key question we have is, what if you encounter a shortfall in funding during your graduate studies? So what if 1 month or throughout your degree, you don't have enough money and you run into a challenge in terms of funding? Queen's has a number of emergency and general bursaries to help you should you encounter this challenge. And so if you find yourself in this position, it's important for you to know that you can reach out to your graduate program assistant or chair, and they will direct you to these available resources. So we never want to see a student struggle academically because they are facing financial challenges. And we want you to know that there are emergency funds should you face financial challenges during your academic studies at Queen's. If you are new to Kingston or new to Canada, you may have questions about the cost of living in Kingston. So what does it mean to receive an annual funding package in relation to how much it'll cost to live in Kingston? And so we have prepared a number of guides and resources for you to gain a better understanding of what the cost of living is like in Kingston. And many of these guides and resources were created from a student perspective and with the help of students living in our community currently. And so the School of Graduate Studies has a graduate funding guide where it presents several profiles of what it's like to live in Kingston from a graduate student perspective. And that's located on our School of Graduate Studies website under that funding webpage that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. The Queen's Registrar's website has an expenses and budgets webpage. On that webpage, it outlines several key resources on the cost of living in Kingston, as well as templates for budgeting as a student. And those are very helpful as you think about what it might be like to live in Kingston and as a student here. And then as you think about joining the Queen's community and Kingston community, we do have a number of advisors to support housing and thinking about that as a resource. So we have our off-campus housing resource webpage and our off-campus housing living advisor. Both of those spaces are opportunities for you to learn more about the cost of living and in particular the housing environment in Kingston. I also wanted to mention our Grad Essentials Resource Hub. So when you become a student at Queen's, you are automatically enrolled in our Grad Essentials Resource Hub, which is available on our learning platform on Q. And in the Grad Essentials Resource Hub, there are 11 resource hubs, essentially modules that you can review and complete, and they provide you with essential information for you to be successful as a Queen's student. One of those resource hubs is related to funding and provides you with all information about various funding resources, awards, and opportunities for you to access during your time here as a student. And so more information about this resource hub will be available to you when you become a student at Queen's, and you'll be able to access that resource at that time. That concludes the formal presentation for today, and I'd like to now turn it over to your questions, and always recognize that you are welcome to reach out to the School of Graduate Studies with any questions you might have following this presentation as well. So thanks very much, and Matt, I think we can stop recording at this time.